You'll never amount to anything. He's just not wired for success. These were the exact words my sister Sarah spoke about my son Jacob at our family dinner 5 years ago. I still remember how his shoulders slumped as he excused himself from the table. What my sister didn't know was that Jacob had been secretly writing a book in his bedroom every night for the past 2 years. Stay with me to see the look on Sarah's face when my failure of a son handed her his New York Times bestseller at our Christmas gathering. Welcome to Plot Twist Life, where I share stories that prove life's greatest victories often come after our biggest challenges. If you're new here, I'm Michael, and I believe that everyone has potential waiting to be unlocked, even when others can't see it. Before I tell you how my sister ate her words about my son's future, make sure to subscribe to Plot Twist Life for more stories that will inspire you to never give up on your dreams, no matter who doubts you. Now, let's dive into a story that changed our entire family forever. The tension between my sister Sarah and my son Jacob didn't start with that fateful dinner. It had been building for years, brick by painful brick. Sarah had always been the successful one in our family, valedictorian, Ivy League education, corner office by 30. She measured everyone by the same rigid yardstick she used for herself. Unfortunately, Jacob didn't fit her definition of success. From an early age, Jacob was different. While other kids were playing sports or competing for top grades, Jacob lived in his imagination. He'd spend hours staring at clouds, creating elaborate stories about the shapes he saw. His teachers would call me in for conferences, concerned about his daydreaming and lack of focus. His grades were average at best. He's smart, they'd say, but he just doesn't apply himself. I'll admit, there were times I worried too. As a single father raising Jacob after his mother passed away when he was just 7, I sometimes wondered if I was doing enough. But there was something special about Jacob's way of seeing the world that I couldn't bring myself to squash. Sarah, however, had no such reservations. "Michael, you're doing him no favors by indulging this behavior," she'd lecture me during our weekly phone calls. The real world doesn't reward dreamers. It rewards doers, achievers, people who can focus and deliver results. When Jacob turned 16 and his grades continued to hover around C's and B's, Sarah's concern turned to outright criticism. It all came to a head at Jacob's 16th birthday dinner. Sarah had gifted him a stack of books with titles like Success Habits for Teens and How to Get into an Ivy League School. "I'm worried about your future," she told him bluntly as he unwrapped them. "You need to start taking life seriously." Jacob had simply nodded, thanked her politely, and later that night I found the books untouched in the hallway trash can. I didn't say anything. Instead, I gave him the gift I'd been saving. A beautiful leather-bound journal with his name embossed on the cover. "Dad, this is perfect," he'd whispered, his eyes lighting up in a way they rarely did anymore. What I didn't know then was that this journal would become the first of many, filled with the beginnings of what would later change everything. The dinner where Sarah crossed the line happened during Jacob's senior year of high school. We were celebrating Sarah's promotion to senior partner at her law firm. The conversation had turned to college applications, and Jacob quietly mentioned he was thinking about taking a gap year. The silence that followed was deafening. "A gap year?" Sarah set down her wine glass with such force I thought it might shatter. "To do what exactly? Waste more time daydreaming?" "I just want some time to figure things out," Jacob said, his voice small but determined. "Maybe travel a bit, work on my writing." "Your writing?" Sarah laughed, and it wasn't a kind sound. "Jacob, be realistic. Do you know how competitive that field is? You'll never make a living as a writer." I started to intervene, but Sarah was on a roll. "You'll never amount to anything with this attitude. You're just not wired for success like the rest of the family. Some people are born with drive, and some aren't. It's time someone told you the truth." Jacob's face went pale. He looked at me, perhaps hoping I'd defend him. I opened my mouth, but before I could speak, he pushed back his chair and quietly excused himself. The sound of the front door closing moments later hung in the air between Sarah and me. "That was completely unnecessary," I finally said, my voice shaking with anger. "Someone had to say it," Sarah replied, unfazed. "You've been coddling him for years. He needs a reality check." What Sarah didn't know, what none of us knew, was that Jacob had been working on something in secret for nearly 2 years. Each night after I thought he'd gone to sleep, he'd been writing in journals similar to the one I'd given him. Not aimless scribbles or teenage poetry, but chapters of a novel that had been taking shape in his mind since he was 13. The night of that dinner, after Sarah left, I found Jacob sitting on the porch swing, staring at the stars. "I'm sorry about what she said," I told him, sitting down beside him. "It's okay, Dad. She might be right." "No," I said firmly. "She's not right. Not everyone's path looks the same." Jacob was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned to me, his expression serious in the moonlight. "Dad, there's something I need to tell you." That night, Jacob showed me his work for the first time. 6 completed journals filled with the story of a young boy who discovers he can hear the thoughts of books. Not just the words on the pages, but the living consciousness of the stories themselves. It was unlike anything I'd ever read. Part fantasy, part coming of age, part meditation on the power of stories to shape our reality. "This is what I've been doing instead of studying for calculus," he admitted with a small smile. I stayed up until dawn, reading what he'd written. It wasn't just good, it was extraordinary. The voice was raw in places, certainly, but the imagination, the depth of character, the emotional truth of it took my breath away. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked him over breakfast. He shrugged. "I wasn't sure if it was any good, and I didn't want anyone to tell me to stop before I was finished." "Sarah doesn't understand," I told him. "But she's wrong about you, Jacob. This is special. You're special." His gap year began with a promise. He would finish his novel and submit it to publishers. If nothing came of it after a year, he'd enroll in college and pursue a more conventional path. I supported him completely, though I kept his project a secret from the rest of the family, especially Sarah, who continued to express her disapproval of his time wasting. Jacob worked with a discipline that would have shocked my sister. Every morning, he'd wake at 5, make a pot of coffee, and write until noon. Afternoons were for research, reading, and revising. He joined a local writing group, led by a retired editor who quickly recognized his talent and took him under her wing. 6 months into his gap year, Jacob completed his manuscript. 347 pages that represented not just a story, but a complete transformation in my son. The quiet, distracted boy who'd been labeled as lacking focus had shown a level of dedication that put most adults to shame. With guidance from his mentor, Jacob prepared query letters to literary agents. The rejections came quickly at first, form letters that barely acknowledged the hours he'd poured into his work. After the 15th rejection, I found him sitting at the kitchen table, staring at his computer screen. "Maybe Aunt Sarah was right," he said quietly. "Maybe I'm just not cut out for this." 15 rejections is nothing in publishing, I told him, repeating what his mentor had explained. Some of the greatest books ever written were rejected dozens of times before someone recognized their value. Jacob nodded, but I could see the doubt creeping in. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I emailed Sarah. Despite our disagreements about Jacob, she was still my sister, and she had connections everywhere. I swallowed my pride and asked if she knew anyone in publishing who might be willing to look at Jacob's manuscript. Not to publish it as a favor, but just to give him honest feedback from an industry professional. Her response was predictably dismissive. "Michael, you're not helping him by encouraging these unrealistic dreams." He needs to face reality and get back on track with college applications. I didn't tell Jacob about this exchange. Instead, I encouraged him to keep sending out queries. In the meantime, he got a part-time job at the local bookstore, where he could immerse himself in the world he hoped to enter. The turning point came 8 months into his gap year. An email arrived from a small but respected literary agency in New York. They wanted to see the full manuscript. 3 weeks later, Jacob had an agent. A month after that, his book went to auction, with 5 publishing houses bidding for the rights. The advance wasn't life-changing money, but it was enough to cover 4 years of college tuition. More importantly, it was validation. His book, The Whispers on the Page, would be published the following year. I'll never forget the day the first hardcover copy arrived at our house. Jacob held it in his hands like it was made of glass, running his fingers over his name on the cover. "You did it," I said, fighting back tears. "We did it," he corrected me. "I wouldn't have had the courage without you believing in me." We decided not to tell Sarah right away. She'd been increasingly distant since our disagreement, limiting our interactions to brief phone calls on holidays. The book's publication date was set for December 15th, just 10 days before our family's traditional Christmas gathering. Jacob wanted to surprise her. What we didn't anticipate was the book's reception. The Whispers on the Page struck a chord with readers immediately. The publisher had planned a modest marketing campaign for a debut author, but word of mouth spread rapidly. Influential book bloggers championed it. A famous author tweeted about it, calling it the most original debut I've read in a decade. 3 weeks after publication, Jacob's novel hit the New York Times bestseller list. The Christmas gathering that year was at Sarah's house, an elegant brownstone in Boston that she'd purchased after making partner. Jacob and I arrived last, a strategic decision on our part. As we walked in, carrying wrapped gifts and a bottle of wine, the familiar anxiety crept into Jacob's expression. "Remember," I whispered, "no matter how she reacts, what you've accomplished is extraordinary." Sarah greeted us with her usual efficiency, air kisses and rapid-fire questions about our drive. If she noticed the change in Jacob, the confident set of his shoulders, the clear-eyed gaze that no longer avoided hers, she didn't comment on it. Dinner was a tense affair, with conversation carefully navigating around the subject of Jacob's future. Finally, as dessert was being served, our cousin Alex innocently asked, "So Jacob, what have you been up to this year? Still doing that gap year thing?" A hush fell over the table. Sarah's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Jacob cleared his throat. "Actually, I've been writing. My first novel was published earlier this month." The silence that followed was broken by my mother. "That's wonderful, dear. What's it called?" "The Whispers on the Page," Jacob replied. "It's a fantasy novel about a boy who can hear the thoughts of books." Sarah set down her fork. "You published a book? Like self-published?" Jacob met her gaze steadily. "No, Aunt Sarah. It was published by Riverhead Books. It's actually doing quite well." Quite well is an understatement. I couldn't help adding. It hit the New York Times bestseller list last week. The expressions around the table ranged from shock to delight. Everyone started talking at once, asking questions, offering congratulations. Everyone except Sarah, who sat perfectly still, her face unreadable. After dinner, as the family moved to the living room for coffee, Jacob approached Sarah with a wrapped package. I hung back, watching the scene unfold. "I brought this for you," he said, holding out the gift. Sarah took it with a confused expression. "Christmas gifts are after dinner, Jacob. You know the tradition." "This isn't exactly a Christmas gift," he replied. "Go ahead, open it." She unwrapped it slowly, revealing a hardcover copy of The Whispers on the Page. But this wasn't just any copy. It was the special first edition that Jacob had asked his publisher to prepare with a unique dedication page, Sarah opened the book, and I saw her eyes widen as she read the words Jacob had written. To my Aunt Sarah, whose words challenged me to prove what was possible. Thank you for showing me exactly the kind of writer and person I didn't want to be. Her head snapped up, her expression a complex mixture of emotions I couldn't fully decipher. Jacob, I don't expect an apology, he said quietly. I just wanted you to have this, to know that sometimes the people you least expect can surprise you. Sarah stared at the book in her hands, then back at Jacob. The silence stretched between them until it seemed to fill the entire room. Can I read it? She finally asked, her voice lacking its usual confidence. Jacob nodded. That's why I brought it. That night marked a turning point in their relationship. Sarah didn't immediately transform into a supportive aunt, but something had shifted. As we prepared to leave, she pulled Jacob aside. I couldn't hear what was said, but when Jacob returned to the car, his expression was thoughtful. She asked if I'd sign her copy, he told me. And she said she started reading it already. In the months that followed, Jacob's success continued to grow. The Whispers on the Page was optioned for a film adaptation. He received invitations to speak at schools and libraries. Literary magazines requested interviews. And through it all, he maintained the same disciplined writing schedule, already working on his second novel. Sarah's transformation was more gradual, but no less significant. She began recommending Jacob's book to her colleagues. She sent him articles about writing and publishing. And when his book was selected for her law firm's book club, she called to tell him how proud she was that her colleagues were discussing his work. The most surprising change came 6 months after that Christmas dinner. Sarah called me out of the blue. I need your advice, she said, the words clearly difficult for her to speak. I've been writing something, a memoir about our childhood. It's probably terrible, but I can't stop thinking about it. Do you think Jacob would be willing to read it? To tell me if there's anything worth pursuing? I smiled into the phone. I think he'd be honored. Today, 3 years later, Jacob has published his third novel. Sarah's memoir, Sisters and Strangers, will be released next month by the same publisher. They've developed a relationship I never would have thought possible, bound by a shared understanding of what it means to create, to put yourself on the page, to risk rejection in pursuit of something meaningful. As for me, I've learned that success rarely looks the way we imagine it will. Jacob never became the conventional achiever Sarah once thought he should be. Instead, he created his own definition of success, one based on passion, authenticity, and the courage to follow an unconventional path. The journals I gave Jacob for his 16th birthday now sit in a glass case in his writing studio, alongside the framed rejection letters he received for his first novel. They're reminders, he says, that the distance between failure and success is often just a matter of perspective and persistence. Last week, at the launch party for Jacob's third novel, Sarah raised her glass for a toast. To my nephew, she said, her voice thick with emotion, who taught me that success isn't about following a prescribed path. It's about having the courage to create your own. Jacob caught my eye across the room, and in that moment, I saw reflected back at me not just the boy who had struggled to fit into conventional expectations, but the man who had transcended them. A best-selling author, yes, but more importantly, someone who had remained true to himself despite the doubts of others. And isn't that the greatest success story of all? If this story resonated with you, remember that every person has potential waiting to be unlocked, even when others can't see it. Maybe you've been told you'll never succeed, or that your dreams are unrealistic. Maybe you're that person for someone else in your life. Either way, I hope Jacob's journey inspires you to believe in the power of persistence and authenticity. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever been underestimated? Or have you ever had to admit you were wrong about someone's potential? Share your story with our Plot Twist Life community. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss another story that might just change your perspective. Remember, the greatest plot twists in life often come when we least expect them, and they frequently begin with someone saying, "You'll never succeed." Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.